The public is being conditioned to look at the sky, to watch for missiles. This is a strategic misdirection. A missile launch is a declaration of war with a return address. It has a kinetic cost and invites a symmetric, overwhelming response. A state facing a terminal solvency crisis, like Iran, with reports of over 12,400 protesters killed, cannot afford a symmetric conflict. Its calculus is zero-sum. The missile narrative is a liability. The real vector is not kinetic. It is systemic. The real weapon is not an explosion. It is silence. Global capital understands part of this. Airlines continue to avoid Iranian airspace even after official reopening. They are pricing in risk, but they are still looking at the sky. This is a fundamental error in analysis. The true launch-on-warning trigger for this new protocol is not a NOTAM for airspace, but the disruption of data flow. The primary targets are the two arteries of the global nervous system: undersea fiber optic cables and low Earth orbit satellites. This is not theoretical. Between January 13th and 15th, Japan's Ministry of Defense tracked a Russian Vishnya-class intelligence collection ship, hull number 535, mapping the seabed near critical cable landing points at Yonaguni Island. This is not tourism. This is reconnaissance for a battlespace the public does not know exists. The countermove confirms the threat. The U.S. Missile Defense Agency's SHIELD contract was not awarded to a bomb maker. It was awarded to Iridium, a satellite communications firm. The Pentagon is not primarily hardening silos. It is hardening its data network. They are preparing for an attack on their ability to see, communicate, and command. They are preparing for satellite blinding and signal denial. The math is irrefutable. The next war begins with the flick of a switch, not the launch of a missile. This protocol has a name: the Blind Leviathan. The objective is not to destroy the enemy's assets, but to sever the enemy's senses. By cutting the undersea cables and blinding the orbital assets, an adversary can turn the hyper-connected global power structure into a confused, thrashing giant, unable to direct its financial or military force. It creates a liquidity crisis in command and control. A failing state like Iran doesn't need to win a war. It only needs to leverage global instability as its last remaining asset. It will trigger chaos to make itself too toxic to liquidate. The primary motive is not territorial gain. It is a solvency crisis. A state's leadership, like a corporate board, operates on a balance sheet of political capital. When domestic liabilities, like an unpopular war or mass civil unrest, exceed the asset of public consent, the regime becomes technically insolvent. Its survival is no longer guaranteed by performance, but by emergency measures. The first protocol of a failing system is to externalize its internal costs. CSES analysis confirms this vector in the Ukraine conflict. The war is framed as a domestic liability for Russia, an operation draining popular support and economic stability. This creates a zero-sum death spiral. To justify the kinetic cost of the war, the regime must escalate. To quell internal dissent, it must project external strength. But this is not strength. It is a forced pivot driven by weakness. This is where the calculus shifts to asymmetry. A conventional, symmetric war is prohibitively expensive for an insolvent state. It requires a stable economy and a willing population, assets the regime no longer possesses. Asymmetric warfare, cyber attacks, political destabilization, leveraging global energy markets, proxy conflicts, is cheap. It is the leveraged buyout of global stability by a bankrupt entity. This isn't a theory. It's a repeating blueprint. The killing of over 12,400 protesters in Iran is not a sign of regime strength, but of its terminal internal liability. Faced with this existential domestic threat, the mathematical certainty is that the regime must export chaos. It loses the liability for rational action. A state with nothing left to lose has only one asset to leverage: systemic risk itself. The entire protocol is underwritten by a brutal economic inversion. The kinetic cost model is broken. The Royal United Services Institute, RUSI, puts the numbers in stark relief. A $5 million main battle tank is now a systemic liability, consistently neutralized by a $500 drone. That is a 10,000 to 1 cost asymmetry. This is not a sustainable model for any conventional force. This phenomenon has a designation: the democratization of violence. It signifies the terminal erosion of the nation-state's monopoly on projecting lethal standoff force. For a leadership apparatus facing a terminal solvency crisis, this is not a bug. It is the core feature of its survival protocol. It is mathematically cheaper to export chaos than to subsidize domestic order. The barrier to entry for inflicting systemic pain has collapsed to the price of consumer electronics. The economics of lethality now favor the desperate. The protocol requires a testing environment before full deployment. This is the function of the gray zone. According to analysts at RUSI, travel advisories from states like Canada or South Africa are not isolated security events. They are data points. They signal that these regions have been designated as proxy laboratories. This is where a regime facing a domestic solvency crisis, like Iran's with over 2,400 protesters killed, can stage and test its asymmetric toolkits. These are low-cost, low-liability probes to calibrate the kinetic and political response of Western capital and states. The Russian intelligence vessel probing Japanese waters is the same strategic blueprint. They are not attacking Japan. They are measuring its launch-on-warning posture. In these gray zones, the failing state gauges our reaction time to a minor event to calculate the probability of success for a major one. This is not the conflict. It is the rehearsal for it. The core strategic vulnerability is not the missile. It is the data. The entire architecture of nuclear deterrence rests on a doctrine known as launch-on-warning. This is not a choice, it's a function of time. Intercontinental ballistic missile flight times are measured in minutes. There is no time to convene a committee upon impact. The decision to retaliate must be made based on sensor data that a launch is inbound. The system is designed for a hair trigger. This brings us to the fog of digital war. A strategic cyber attack vector does not target the warhead. It targets the warning system. It blinds the radar. It spoofs the satellite feed. According to analysis from institutions like CSIS, the objective is to create a scenario where the commander has a screen showing incoming threats, but ground truth radar is dark. Or worse, the screen is dark, but they are being told an attack is imminent. In that moment, the protocol forces the commander's hand. He is faced with a binary solvency crisis. Option 1. Trust the protocol, launch on the warning, and potentially initiate global kinetic exchange over a digital ghost. Option 2. Hesitate, bet against the data, and risk the complete liquidation of your nation's command and control. The doctrine is explicitly engineered to make hesitation the more costly option. For a fragile regime facing existential internal threats, such as Iran, with reports of over 2,400 protesters killed, this is not a bug, it's a feature. The liability for a mistake is functionally zero when the alternative is domestic collapse. This is why the U.S. Missile Defense Agency is awarding contracts like SHIELD to Iridium. It's not about stopping a conventional first strike. It's about hardening the data network against an asymmetric attack from a desperate actor willing to leverage the fog of war itself. The protocol for a regime facing a terminal solvency crisis is immutable. Having liquidated over 2,400 of its own citizens, Iran's liability for rational action is zero. The resulting pivot to external, asymmetric escalation is a mathematical certainty, already priced in by global aviation avoiding its airspace. Rival powers and U.S. defense contractors are not guessing, they are reacting. The deployment of Russian intelligence assets near Allied waters, source number 3, and the hardening of U.S. Missile Defense Command and Control with the SHIELD contract Source number 4 are the physical responses to this invisible threat vector. They are preparing for the kinetic phase. Before that phase, however, a calibration shot is required. It will not be a missile. It will be a targeted, attribution-impossible logistics paralysis. The objective is to measure U.S. economic pain tolerance and cyber response latency. Within the next 12 months, anticipate a multi-day, system-wide blackout at a Tier 1 American commercial seaport. The attack will be untraceable. The disruption will be total.